I'm being joined from our Abuja studio by the National Coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, Dr. Sani Aliyu, joins us from our Abuja studio. Thank you so much, Dr. Aliyu, for taking time out to talk to Nigerians on some of these issues. Let's begin by getting clarity, and perhaps for a lot of Nigerians who have been spending about 2 weeks at home, give us an insight on the fact that the PTF has briefed the president on the situation at the end of last week. What is the position of the Presidential Task Force on the restriction of movement order, that is the lockdown order? Is there going to be an extension, or what exactly is happening?
Well, I can't say that. At the moment, we have briefed Mr. President, and we are awaiting his decision on this matter. I'm sure he's consulting and he's doing over our recommendations. But beyond that, I'm afraid you can't ask me to jump the gun. We'll have to wait for Mr. President to make his decision known.
But from a professional point of view, Doctor, is there a possibility of an extension from a professional point of view?
Well, I know you're pushing. So from a professional point of view, in other words, it's no different to the recommendations we would have made to Mr. President. So again, I would say, let's not jump the gun. Let's wait for the president of our country to look at what the recommendations are and then take a decision, and then we'll take it from here. What we do know is that we're still under lockdown in the 2 states of Lagos and Ogun and the FCT, and we will encourage people to continue with that lockdown until at least tomorrow evening, when it comes out of effect. But for the moment, we have to await Mr. President's decision on this.
Having served as an head in dealing with the issues of HIV and AIDS at some point in the country, you have your teeth cut out in some of these areas. A big question now, Doctor, and you managing the scenario across the nation, 19 states so far, over 300 cases. From your projection 3 weeks back, have we gotten to the worst case scenario?
I think we have done modeling studies, and some of the modeling studies that we've done show that if we hadn't put through the lockdown, we probably would have had much higher numbers. And certainly if you look at Europe and North America, the numbers double every 3 to 4 days. And this is not what we are seeing in Nigeria. So to a certain extent, we are doing something right in this country. The numbers remain relatively low compared to the trend in other countries. It's good that people are respecting the lockdown. It's also good that for states that are not in lockdown, people are observing those measures such as physical distancing, hand washing, hygiene, general hygiene in terms of respiratory issues. And really, this is what will keep the virus away. COVID is very different to HIV. With HIV, you know how the transmission happens, and it's not as infectious as COVID. And certainly with COVID, one of the main problems we have is that the symptoms are not so specific. You have a bit of a fever, flu-like symptoms, a bit of a cough, and some shortness of breath. But the majority of people will be well with it. The majority, 80%, 4 out of 5, will not even need hospitalization. And that's why you keep on seeing all these numbers of people being discharged, because even those that go into hospital, the 20%, at least 15% will come out within a few days, or maximum maybe a week or so. So generally speaking, it's a virus that is so selective in terms of in terms of the harm it causes certain groups. So, for example, if you're above the age of 65, 70, your risk of dying from COVID is at least 3 to 4-fold much higher than somebody who's below the age of 40. And we'll continue to push, we'll continue to work to try and keep this pandemic down. But certainly, if people can observe those simple measures that we have advised, it will go a very long way towards making sure that our public remain healthy until this pandemic dies out, because COVID will go away. It will go away. It's only a matter of time. But what we don't want is for COVID to carry away a lot of our people. and wouldn't be the right thing.
I mean, you saying COVID will go away on Easter Day is a lot of hope that you're sending to Nigerians. That's a good news. But the question is, when do you project? America is saying maybe around June. Some 2 weeks ago, that's what America was saying. But in our own case here in Nigeria, what do you see, Dr. Aliyu?
So remember, the incubation period for the illness could be as long as 14 days. So in other words, the new infections we are seeing now, they probably got infected about a week, 2 weeks ago. There's that delay. So whatever happens in the next 2 weeks, we'll still continue to see numbers. And especially as we ramp up the tests throughout the country, we've doubled the number of laboratories doing these tests across the country, particularly in the north. And we are certainly providing more information, particularly to hospitals. One of the key things that we keep on saying is for people that are in the health sector, both our private and public hospitals, please, if you notice any unusual respiratory tract infection or illnesses, please notify us so that we can get people tested. Because increasingly, a lot more of the new infections are not linked to travel abroad, and neither are they linked clearly to people who are positive. In other words, community transmission, I believe, is already happening. And we need to pick up those that are positive so that we can isolate them very quickly and make sure that transmission stops.
That's a worrying scenario because we've seen that happening in Italy, Spain, in the UK, and in the US, where community transmission has gotten to a great deal and a worrying level. For Nigeria, Doc, 1 week ago, we were about in the region of 200 cases confirmed in Nigeria. Today is over 300. Are you worried about the level of community transmission?
So as I said earlier, generally the trend is the way the virus replicates. So if you're infected, on average, you will spread it to 2 to 3 persons with your infection. The R, or what we call the R note, is 2 to 3. So if you do not do anything about it, every 3 to 4 days, the number will double. So if last week we were at 200, midweek we will be at around 400. By now, we'll probably be around 800. So I think it's a good thing that we are still sort of flattening the curve compared to the peak that you'd expect with the normal progress of the illness. But of course, we cannot be complacent. This thing is still going on in our communities, and we will continue to work very closely, particularly with our state authorities, our religious leaders, and our traditional rulers, because that message needs to go out to the public. It is in your best interest to maintain these safety measures. It's in our best interest to get rid of this infection. If developed countries like in the West, in North America, the United States, are struggling with a health system that is very good, what will happen to us if this becomes a major issue? We would really be challenged. And that's why, as they keep on saying, prevention is better than cure. The key thing is to make sure that this infection does not continue to spread. COVID cannot walk to your door, open your door, and infect you. Somebody has to bring it in. And we've got to make sure that people are maintaining those measures that are really critical to protecting themselves, and particularly their loved ones. Because we can see what's happening in the United States for the first time. We are now having mass burials. In Italy, people are dying. In the UK, almost 1,000 deaths per day. And that's really serious. And black Africans, unlike a lot of what's happening in the social media, where people are saying blacks are immune to it or it's our weather, etc., coronavirus is more or less the same as the common cold virus. If you look at the COVID virus under the electron microscope and you look at the coronavirus causing the common cold, they look exactly alike. And you can't tell me that in hot weather you don't get a common cold. We still get cold. We still have a cold in hot weather. So coronavirus will spread even in the hot weather. It will affect blacks in the same way that it affects whites. In the US, more black Africans have died from COVID than the Caucasian population. So we're not immune. The best thing is to keep away. The best thing is to stay at home if you are under lockdown. If you're not under lockdown, be sensible when you are mixing with the public. Make sure that you're washing your hands, you're using disinfection regularly, you're keeping distances from people so that if you have somebody coughing, if you're at a distance 1-2 meters away, those droplets will not fall on your face. But even if you're wearing a mask and somebody with COVID coughs at your face, you'll catch it because your eyes are not covered, are they? So, so in a way, one of the reasons why even WHO is advising people, but rather than saying it's compulsory, is because we don't want people to start thinking that simply because you are wearing mask, you are now protected. Those hand hygiene measures are just as important.
All right.
Because you can still touch your face and you can still transmit the virus to yourself.
Some quick questions here, Dr. Aliyu. One of it is, how many tests have you conducted in Nigeria so far?
So far, we've done well over 3,000 tests. But of course, for a population like Nigeria, that's not really high. One of the problems we're seeing is that we're not getting a lot of demand from certain parts of the country. So especially in the north, for instance, we know there are challenges in terms of getting the test done. People have complained about difficulty in accessing our telephone services, and we're certainly working with partners, particularly NCC and other partners, to increase the number of channels we have so that people can get through. But I think there's also this tendency for people to just say, well, it's not my problem. We don't think there's a major issue because how many people have come across a coronavirus case? It's still relatively rare in Nigeria if we have 300 plus people infected compared to a population of 200 million. So that demand isn't there, but we are working very closely with our media colleagues to make sure that information goes out. And we also rely on people to cooperate and support us as we move forward. This is real. We cannot do it alone. A government cannot enforce measures unless the public support it. And it's in our overall interest to make sure that we are protected.
Dr. Aliyu, a quick one before we go on our first break on the program. Would you suggest a national lockdown at this period, with the scenario you painted?
Well, I must say, I must give you credit for trying. But of course, I wouldn't say anything about a lockdown until we hear from Mr. President's office regarding his final decision. I will be preempting it, whatever I say. Remember, I'm here on behalf of the Presidential Task Force, so I cannot say things just on the basis of what I think. I think collectively we should really await Mr. President's decision on it.
Isn't it worrisome, Dr. Aliyu, that you said 3,000 people have so far been tested nationwide? That's some interesting percentage of our 200 million population, and most of those who whom you have tested positive out of these 3,000. Are you worried about, or are you concerned about that?
So what I said is at least 3,000 have been tested, and we're testing more than 500 a day. So that figure should definitely be much higher by the end of today or moving towards tomorrow. But as I said, our testing is being ramped up. We've doubled the number of laboratories providing the COVID test in the last 7-8 days. We had no laboratory in Kano, Kaduna, just a week ago, and they are now operating. The labs in Lagos are operating 24/7 with shifts, and we expect that we will be testing at least 1,500 by the end of this coming week. Yes, there is a global demand for these tests. They are not easy to get. In addition to that, we do have issues with even the demand side, as I said earlier. But what is even more important is trying to pick those cases that are more likely to give us a positive. So for instance, if you have symptoms of fever or a cough or shortness of breath, and you have the test, if you truly have COVID, you're more likely to have a positive result. Whereas if you don't have any symptoms at all, we wouldn't even recommend doing the test. And this is where the surveillance side is important, particularly from the states, being able to have intelligence from the public health aspect in terms of whether people are presenting with more respiratory tract infections, whether people are having unusual illnesses in the community. And that is where we would come in. But yes, I agree that we need to ramp up our testing. This is something that we are already doing. NCDC is working really very hard at this. But more importantly, people need to reach us. There's no way we would know whether somebody is suffering from COVID-related symptoms unless we are contacted. And I am appealing to the community to be aware and to have a heightened awareness about these cases so that we can test people appropriately and isolate them, as well as chase up the contacts.
Dr. Aliyu, my question really is the worry that out of the 3,000 people that you have tested, 318 have been confirmed positive cases. That is over 10%. Is that not a worrisome figure for you?
No, not at all. In fact, I would say that the efficiency, that's a marker of the efficiency of the testing. You don't test people who do not have COVID. So, for instance, I wouldn't go and do massive testing in the community without having some intelligence in terms of who has this disease. Remember, these tests are very expensive. So the more you pick up, you're much better doing 100 tests and picking up 10 than doing 1,000 tests and picking up 7 or 8. So, in fact, I think NCDC have done very well in terms of their ability to select the persons that are most likely to have a positive result. Because when it comes to an epidemic, that's what you need to do. You need to move with speed. Time is not on your side, and therefore you need to be able to predict who is most likely to have that infection. So it's not a matter of 10%, not at all. This is really bad. It's bad statistics shown. If you say 300 out of 3,000, that's 10%. No, the sample size is far too small to give you an idea of what the true prevalence of COVID is in this country.
Dr. Aliyu, a lot of Nigerians are very concerned, and perhaps they're staying at home. They wanted to have some kind of projection. If you are to give a projection of when we are likely to be out of the woods in this battle against COVID-19, when would that be?
So that's why we call it a pandemic. It's really difficult to predict. We can look at what's happened in other countries. So in China, for instance, even with the lockdown, it took weeks for them to reach R0 of less than 1. If you remember, I said R0 is the number of people that one person will infect. And with COVID, it's between 2 to 3 persons. And when you lock down, that transmission rate falls. And if it falls below 1 person, if an infected person transmits to less than 1 person, the number of new infections rapidly falls. And that's when you get an idea of when the pandemic will end. And even China, when they closed Wuhan, it took 5-6 weeks before they started seeing a downward fall. But what we do know is that lockdown remains the most effective measure when it comes to reducing transmission. 45% reduction in transmission. No other intervention works as effectively as a lockdown. The only other intervention that's been shown to have significant changes in the transmission rate is school closure. And that's partly also because children, especially young people, are more likely to have asymptomatic infection and are more likely to bring it home. But all the other interventions, hand washing, distancing, etc., 7%, 8%, 5%, the biggest yield you can have is a lockdown. And it's understandable even from the science, because remember, the virus cannot walk up to your door, open your door, and infect you. Somebody has to bring it in. So if you bring that physical separation between people, the virus cannot transmit. It cannot move on to the next person. And that's why a lockdown is so effective. However, we know that lockdowns come with pain. A large part of our population have to go out on a daily basis to get their daily meal. It's definitely been challenging for our population, and that's why we're trying as much as we can to get on top of this epidemic so that we can get back to a normal life.
All right. A very critical one again here, Dr. Aliyu, is has there been any success or from our local interventions in the area of vaccines, in the areas of local production of ventilators? What can you tell us about some of the local interventions that have come up so far?
So there's always a silver lining in every cloud. We know from the local manufacturing side, because we've been interfacing with the Federal Ministry of Trade and Industry, that a lot of our manufacturers are now looking at manufacturing personal protective equipment such as masks, gloves, etc., and even the coveralls that are used in terms of protection. But when it comes to the sort of more technologically advanced things like ventilators, I know a particular automobile company that has shown interest in helping with the manufacture of ventilators. But ventilators are they are sophisticated instruments. They require a lot of technology, and on their own, Sheun, remember, a ventilator on its own will not cannot make up an ITU. You need skilled people. You need particularly consultant anesthetists. You need really highly skilled labor. And so even if we were to buy all the ventilators we need, and there have been estimates in terms of how much ventilators we need in this country, if we don't have the people to operate them, if we don't have the necessary manpower, that in itself becomes a limitation. There are states in Nigeria that do not have consultant anesthetists. There are states, at least 14 states, the last time we mapped, that had 2 or less consultant anesthetists. You cannot operate an ICU in that sort of situation. You need anesthetic consultants, you need ICU nurses, you need specialists in order to run ICUs. So in as much as we move towards local manufacture of PPE and also looking at ventilators, we also shouldn't forget the need for trained manpower, because human resources are actually the biggest asset we can have. In terms of your question about vaccine, I'm afraid even in the developed world, we're still very far off from a vaccine, at least a year away from having any sort of COVID vaccine. And we know there's no established treatment for this disease. There are a lot of drugs that are being tried. There's a major trial that's going on, the Solidarity trial, which is being hosted by WHO. And hopefully that would give us some answers in the coming months. But the key thing to remember is there's no treatment for this. The best treatment is not to get it. And the best way for not getting it is to keep away from people who might have it. In other words, isolate yourself.
Dr. Sani Aliyu, National Coordinator of the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19. Thank you so much for talking to Nigerians tonight on some of these issues on COVID-19. Thank you so much indeed for your intervention tonight.
Thank you for having me.